Before we dive into tonight's tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more creepy stories that will keep you up at night. The rain was coming down in sheets that night, slamming against the roof of the Pine Rest Motel like it was trying to break in. That little rundown joint sat off some nowhere highway, the kind of place you only stop at if your tank's on fumes or your life's already gone sideways. Its neon sign, half the letters burned out, buzzed and flickered in the dark, throwing this sickly green glow across the parking lot. Inside the lobby, it was dead quiet at first, just the hum of an old fridge in the corner and the occasional drip from a leak in the ceiling plinking into a coffee can somebody'd shoved under it. Then, out of nowhere, every phone in the room lit up at once, sharp, piercing buzzes cutting through the stillness. The flat-screen TV bolted to the wall. Some ancient thing with a cracked remote crackled to life too, spitting out static before the words blared across it in big, ugly red letters. Zombie outbreak reported. Stay indoors. Avoid bites. You could feel the air shift, like somebody'd flipped a switch from bored to terrified in half a heartbeat. And then, faint but growing louder, these low, guttural moans started seeping in from outside, mixing with the storm like some messed-up soundtrack. Ellie Grant was over by the window, staring out into the rain like she could see straight through it. She's 34, a truck driver with hands that looked like they'd wrestled steering wheels through a decade of bad roads. Her fingers were wrapped tight around this big, greasy wrench she'd pulled from the toolbox in her semi, parked out back. Her brother had died in a wreck just a month ago, jackknifed rig on an icy overpass, and you could tell it still gnawed at her, the way her jaw clenched every time the wind howled a little too loud. Her short, dark hair was plastered to her forehead, dripping water onto the collar of her flannel shirt as she squinted into the night, trying to make sense of the shadows moving out there. Over by the vending machine, Noah Tate was fidgeting like a kid who'd had too much soda. He's 19, a college dropout with a beat-up Toyota Corolla that coughed its last breath a mile back. The guy was a bundle of nerves, pacing in these quick, jerky steps, his sneakers squeaking on the chipped linoleum floor. He had a tire iron gripped in both hands, knuckles white, and his hoodie, some faded gray thing, was soaked through, sticking to his skinny frame. Every time the thunder rumbled, he flinched, his eyes darting to the door like he expected it to burst open any second. Beth Harper was a wreck, pacing back and forth near the check-in counter, her graying ponytail swinging with every step. She's 50, a widow who'd rolled in earlier in her shiny 2023 Honda CR-V, probably the newest car in the lot. She'd grabbed a kitchen knife from her room, one of those cheap serrated ones you'd use to cut tomatoes, and she held it out in front of her like it was a shield. Her hands trembled, and every few seconds she'd mutter something under her breath, maybe a prayer, maybe just nonsense to keep herself from falling apart. She kept glancing at the others, like she was waiting for someone to tell her this was all a bad dream. Then there was Ray Delgado, leaning against the counter with this calm that felt almost out of place. He's 42, a mechanic with a rough edge to him, the kind of guy who'd seen enough in life to not blink at much. He had a Glock 19 in his hand, pulled from the glove box of his Ford F-150 out in the lot, and a crowbar slung over his shoulder like he was ready to fix a car or bash a skull, whichever came first. His work boots scuffed the floor as he shifted his weight, his dark eyes scanning the room, sizing everybody up. Ellie's breath hitched, and she pressed her face closer to the window, the glass fogging up where her nose brushed it. "Holy shit," she whispered, her voice low and rough. Out in the parking lot, under the faint flicker of a streetlight, she saw it, a gas station clerk from the Shell across the road, stumbling through the rain. His jaw was hanging open, torn clean apart like something had ripped into him, and he was lurching toward a guy refueling a Tesla. Before anybody could blink, the clerk lunged, teeth sinking into the guy's neck, blood spraying across the car's sleek white hood. The traveler screamed, thrashing as he went down, and Ellie's grip on the wrench tightened until her knuckles popped. Ray didn't hesitate. He crossed the lobby in 3 long strides, slamming the deadbolt on the door with a loud clunk and muttering, "Son of a bitch, this is real." His voice was gravelly, like he'd smoked too many cigarettes over too many late nights. But then Beth's phone chirped, cutting through the tension, and she fumbled it out of her pocket with shaking hands. The screen glowed bright, a shaky TikTok live playing, a guy a mile west, his voice high and panicked, yelling, "There's a safe zone! A mile that way, they're taking people in." The camera wobbled, catching flashes of rain and movement, then a chorus of groans swallowed his words, and the feed cut to black. Beth dropped the phone onto the counter, her knife clattering beside it as she pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Nobody had time to process it. A loud thud rocked the room. A zombie, this big guy in a soaked flannel shirt, smashed his fist against the window Ellie was standing by. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing out from the impact, and she stumbled back, her boots skidding on the wet floor. "Get back!" Ray barked, shoving the counter aside to brace the door with it, his crowbar clanging against the metal frame as he wedged it in place. Noah, though, he was losing it. He'd been pacing tighter and tighter circles, and now his keys slipped from his pocket, jangling as they hit the floor. Before anybody could react, a sharp beep, beep, beep echoed from outside, his Corolla's alarm blaring loud enough to wake the dead. Well, louder than that, apparently, because within seconds, the moans outside got closer, sharper. Ellie spun back to the window, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw them, maybe a dozen figures, soaked to the bone, lurching out of the highway's shadows toward the motel. Their clothes hung off them in tatters, rain streaming down pale, rotting faces, and one of them, a woman in what used to be a waitress uniform, dragged a mangled leg behind her, leaving a dark smear on the asphalt. "Shut it off, kid!" Ray snapped, his voice cutting through the chaos as he yanked the crowbar free and gripped it like a bat. Noah dropped to his knees, scrambling for the keys, his fingers slipping on the wet floor. "I can't find the button," he stammered, his voice cracking as he mashed at the fob. The alarm kept screaming, and the pounding on the walls grew louder, fists and bodies slamming against the flimsy siding. Ellie grabbed Noah by the hoodie, hauling him up. "Move now!" she yelled, shoving him toward the back of the lobby as the first splintered crack of wood echoed from the doorframe. The room was a mess now, Beth whimpering by the counter, clutching her knife again, Ray swearing under his breath as he braced the door, and Noah tripping over his own feet, tire iron dangling uselessly in his hand. Ellie tightened her grip on the wrench, her eyes locked on the window where that flannel shirt zombie was still hammering away, the glass bowing inward with every hit. The storm outside roared louder, thunder rolling like a warning, and those moans, they were everywhere now, pressing in from all sides, seeping into the cracks of the motel like the rain itself. They were trapped, and it was only a matter of time before something gave. So there they were, stuck in that dingy lobby, the rain pounding down and the dead closing in. The Pine Rest Motel wasn't built for this. The walls, thin, cheap wood slapped together decades ago, creaked and groaned under the weight of those things outside, their nails scraping like they were trying to peel the place apart. You could hear it over the rain, this awful scratching mixed with those deep, wet moans that made your stomach twist. Ellie was still by the window, her boots planted firm on the soggy carpet, wrench in one hand like she was ready to swing at anything that broke through. She turned to the others, her voice cutting through the racket. "We can't stay here," she said, sharp and steady, like she'd already made up her mind. "They're gonna bust in, and then what? We're done. We've gotta move." Beth was crumpled against the counter now, her knees pulled up, that kitchen knife shaking in her hands so bad it looked like it might slip right out. Tears streaked her face, mixing with the damp strands of her ponytail, and she was muttering something, half to herself, half to nobody. "Tom would have known what to do," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He always had a plan, always. God, why'd you take him?" Her husband had been gone a couple years. Heart attack in their kitchen, she'd told Ellie earlier when they'd shared a smoke out front. And now here she was, alone, falling apart while the world did the same. Ellie shot her a look, not mean, just tired, and said, "Beth, pull it together. We're getting out. You hear me?" Noah was over by the vending machine, hunched over his backpack like it was some lifeline. He'd slung the tire iron over his shoulder, letting it dangle there, and was digging through the bag, rummaging past a crumpled pack of smokes, a half-empty water bottle, some loose change. His hands moved quick, too quick, and if you looked close, you'd see him tugging his hoodie sleeve down over his wrist. There was a dark smear there, blood crusted into the fabric, but he kept it low, out of sight, his eyes flicking up every few seconds to make sure nobody noticed. The kid was jittery as hell, and when his phone buzzed in his pocket, probably another text from his mom or some buddy he'd never see again, he slapped at it through the denim, fumbling to mute it. His fingers shook so bad he nearly dropped the thing. Ray, though, he was already moving. "I'm checking the roof," he grunted, slinging the crowbar back over his shoulder and heading for the little maintenance ladder in the corner. His boots thudded heavy on the floor, leaving muddy prints, and his jacket, some beat-up denim thing, was already soaked from the rain leaking through the ceiling. He climbed up, shoving the trapdoor open with a scrape of metal, and hauled himself out into the storm. The wind hit him hard up there, whipping the rain sideways into his face, stinging his eyes as he crouched low and edged toward the front of the building. He gripped the Glock tight, the cold metal biting into his palm, and peered out over the highway. It was a damn graveyard. SUVs flipped on their sides, sedans smashed into guardrails, a pickup with its driver's door hanging open and nobody inside. And everywhere, those shambling shapes, dozens of them, weaving through the wrecks like they owned the place, their soaked clothes flapping in the wind. That's when he saw it. One of them, down below, staring right up at him. It was wearing a torn hoodie, the kind Noah had on, but this thing's face was a mess. Pale, sunken, with blood streaking down from a gash across its cheek. Its neck twisted with this sickening crack like wet wood snapping, and it reached up, clawing at the wall with bony fingers. Rain washed the blood down its chin, pooling in the cracks of the pavement below, and Ray just froze for a second, his breath catching in his throat. "Jesus," he muttered, shaking it off, and scrambled back from the edge, his boots slipping a little on the wet shingles. Inside, things were falling apart fast. Beth had stood up, pacing again, and her keys, clipped to a little heart-shaped fob, jingled in her pocket. She stopped dead, her eyes going wide. Oh no," she stammered, patting herself down. "The car. I left the keys in the ignition." Before anybody could stop her, the Honda's headlights flashed outside, slicing through the dark as the engine tried to turn over. Some automatic start thing she'd forgotten about. Ellie cursed under her breath and bolted back to the window, wrench banging against her thigh as she moved. Out in the lot, the light was like a damn beacon, and the shadows shifted. More of those things, maybe 20 now, spilling out from behind the wrecked cars, lurching toward the motel with that awful, uneven stagger. "Ray!" Ellie yelled, her voice hoarse over the storm. He dropped back through the trapdoor, landing hard on the floor with a grunt, water dripping off him in rivers. "Gimme the gun," she said, holding out her hand. He didn't argue, just slapped the Glock into her palm and fished a spare magazine from his pocket, tossing it to her. 15 rounds, he said, wiping rain from his face. "Make 'em count." She nodded, racking the slide with a sharp click, and lined up a shot through the cracked window. The zombie out front, the big one in the flannel, was still pounding away, and she squeezed the trigger. The gunshot boomed, loud enough to rattle your teeth, and the thing's head snapped back, skull shattering like a dropped melon, gore splattering across the glass. It crumpled into the mud, but the sound, God! The sound was like ringing a dinner bell. The moans outside swelled, rising over the thunder, and more of them came stumbling in, faster now, drawn by the noise. Ellie's jaw tightened, her teeth grinding as she lowered the gun, her chest heaving. She'd made her call. They were fighting their way out, no question. Beth's sobs spiked into a full-on wail, her knife clutched so tight her knuckles were white, her whole body shaking as she stared at the window. "We're gonna die," she whimpered, rocking back on her heels. "We're all gonna die here." Noah flinched at that, his phone buzzing again in his pocket, and he mashed at it harder, silencing it with a shaky curse. "Shut up, lady," he snapped, his voice breaking, but there was no heat in it, just fear, raw and ragged. Ray climbed back to his feet, shaking water from his hands, and grabbed the crowbar again. "She's right about one thing," he said, nodding at Ellie. "We stay. We're dead. That roof's no good. Too many down there, and they're climbing now. We need a plan, and we need it yesterday." The pounding on the walls was louder now, wood splintering in little pops, and the window, the one Ellie'd shot through, was bowing inward, the cracks spreading with every hit. The storm roared on, lightning flashing bright enough to show the horde outside, their pale faces pressed against the glass, eyes empty and mouths gaping. Ellie turned to the group, her breath steadying even as her heart hammered. "We've got one shot," she said, her voice low but firm. "That safe zone's a mile west. We move fast, we might make it. But we're not waiting for this place to fall apart." She glanced at Ray, then Noah, then Beth, her eyes hard. "Grab what you've got, and let's figure out how the hell we're breaking out of here." That back window didn't stand a chance. Ellie reared back with her wrench, her arm muscles flexing under her soaked flannel, and brought it down hard, crack, the glass shattering outward in a jagged spray. Rain blasted in, cold and sharp, stinging their faces as she kicked the last shards free with her boot. "Go! Go!" she shouted, waving the others through, her voice rough over the howling wind. Ray was first, ducking low and scrambling out, his boots splashing into the mud on the other side. Noah stumbled after him, tire iron banging against the frame as he went, and Beth, poor Beth, hobbled behind, her knife still clutched tight, her face pale and streaked with tears. The storm hit them like a wall, rain pelting down so hard it felt like needles on their skin. Ellie climbed out last, her wrench swinging at her side, and she squinted into the dark, the motel's flickering neon casting long, twisted shadows across the lot. They were behind the building now, near a row of overgrown bushes and a ditch running parallel to the highway. Ray took point, his crowbar raised and froze as something moved, a zombie lurching out from behind a wrecked Jeep, its front end smashed into a tree. This thing was big, wearing what might have been a park ranger uniform once, now torn and soaked black with blood. It staggered toward them, arms outstretched, and Ray didn't hesitate. He swung the crowbar hard, a wet crunch as it caved in the side of the thing's skull, brain matter splattering into the mud. "Keep moving," he barked, shaking gore off the metal as the body slumped. But they weren't clear yet. Another one stumbled up from the ditch, faster this time, some skinny guy in a shredded raincoat, his eyes milky and his teeth bared. It went straight for Beth, who was lagging behind, her steps uneven from panic. She screamed, a high, piercing sound that cut through the thunder as its jaws clamped down on her calf, tearing through her jeans. Blood sprayed, hot and dark, and she went down hard, splashing into the muddy water. "Help me!" she shrieked, clawing at the ground, her knife skittering away into the weeds. The zombie gnawed at her leg, growling like a dog with a bone, and Ellie spun around, her stomach lurching. Beth's eyes locked on hers, wide and pleading. "Cut it off! Please, Ellie, cut it off!" she begged, her voice breaking into sobs. Ellie froze, the wrench trembling in her hand. She'd never done anything like this, never even thought about it. "I can't," she stammered, but Beth grabbed her arm, nails digging in. "Do it, or I'm dead anyway." Ray shoved past Noah, who was just standing there gawking, and tossed Ellie the crowbar. "You heard her," he said, his tone flat but urgent. Ellie swallowed hard, the rain pounding her face, and gripped the crowbar with both hands. She swung it down fast, no time to think, thwack. The metal bit through flesh and bone, severing Beth's leg just below the knee. Blood gushed out, soaking Ellie's boots and mixing with the mud, and Beth's scream turned into a choked gasp before she passed out, her head lolling back into the dirt. "Move now!" Ray yelled, grabbing Beth's arms and dragging her along, her stump trailing a dark streak behind them. Ellie shook off the shock, her hands slick with blood and rain, and took the lead again, splashing through the ditch. The water was ankle-deep, cold as hell, and the ground sucked at their boots with every step. Up ahead, a flipped Amazon van loomed out of the dark, its back doors busted open, soggy cardboard boxes spilling out. Books, clothes, some kid's toy truck, all ruined in the downpour. And then the Undead came pouring out from behind it, half a dozen of them, their delivery driver uniforms hanging off decayed frames. Ellie dodged left, her wrench swinging to knock one's arm aside, while Ray hauled Beth over his shoulder, grunting under the weight. Noah, though, he wasn't so lucky. He tripped over a tire half buried in the muck, going down hard with a yelp, his tire iron splashing away. One of those Amazon zombies lunged, its teeth snapping inches from his face, spit and blood dripping onto his cheek. "Ray!" he screamed, thrashing under it, his hands shoving at its chest. Ray dropped Beth into the mud, sorry, but she wasn't moving much anyway, and yanked Noah up by the collar, the Glock already in his other hand. He jammed the barrel against the thing's eye and fired. Bang, 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 3 quick shots, the muzzle flash lighting up its rotting face as the bullet punched through, dropping it limp. "Get your ass up," Ray snapped, shoving Noah forward, his breath heaving. They kept running, Beth slung over Ray's shoulder now, her blood dripping down his back. But then she stirred, a low growl rumbling in her throat. Way too fast, way too wrong. Her eyes snapped open, milky and blank, and she twisted in Ray's grip, lunging at Noah with a snarl that didn't sound human anymore. "Shit!" Noah stumbled back, his sneakers slipping, and Ray dropped her, fumbling with the Glock. He fired 3 more times. Bang, bang, bang. Bullets ripping into her chest, her body jerking with each hit. She collapsed into the ditch, her Honda key fob slipping from her pocket and splashing into the mud, its little heart charm glinting in the lightning. Ray's hands shook as he ejected the empty mag and slapped the spare in, the click loud even over the storm. Ellie grabbed his arm, pulling him along. "No time, keep going," she shouted, her voice raw. They splashed out of the ditch, the highway stretching dark and endless ahead, but something caught her eye, a big propane tank by the motel's generator, half hidden in the chaos. Its valve was hissing, a faint white mist curling out, and an idea hit her like a punch. "Ray, the tank!" she yelled, pointing. He didn't ask questions, just raised the Glock, steadying his aim despite the rain blurring his vision, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, sharp and final, and then, boom. The explosion was deafening, a fireball roaring up into the night, flames swallowing the horde clawing at the motel's back wall. The heat blasted their faces, singeing their hair, and the east wall of the building buckled, collapsing in a shower of splintered wood and twisted metal. Ellie dove to the side, tackling Noah out of the way as chunks of debris rained down, one beam slamming into the ground inches from Ray's head. They hit the dirt hard, rolling clear, the firelight flickering across their soaked, battered bodies. The horde was scattered, some burning, some crushed under the rubble, but the moans didn't stop. Ellie pushed herself up, mud caking her hands, and glanced back at the inferno. "Halfway there," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames. Ray coughed, wiping ash from his face, and hauled Noah to his feet. "Let's not waste it," he said, his tone grim, and they stumbled forward into the storm, the safe zone still a desperate mile away. The rain hadn't let up one bit, drumming hard on the wrecked cars scattered across the Dollar General parking lot, like it was trying to drown out the madness. Ellie, Ray, and Noah stumbled in, their boots sloshing through puddles, the storm soaking them down to their bones. The place was a ghost town. Pickup trucks with flat tires, a Prius with its windows smashed in, glass glittering on the asphalt like broken teeth. The store's sign flickered weakly, buzzing in the dark, and the wind whipped a stray shopping bag across the lot, tumbling end over end. Ellie's breath was ragged, her wrench dangling loose in her hand as she scanned the shadows, the Glock tucked into her waistband now that Ray had taken point with the crowbar. They'd made it maybe half a mile from the motel, the explosion's glow still faintly lighting the horizon behind them, when Noah stopped dead in his tracks. His shoulders slumped, and he let out this shaky, broken sound, like a sob that didn't know how to finish. "Guys," he said, his voice cracking, barely loud enough over the rain. "I gotta tell you something." Ellie turned, her boots scraping the wet pavement, and Ray lowered the crowbar, his brow furrowing. Noah's hands trembled as he tugged up his hoodie sleeve, slow and deliberate, revealing a festering bite on his forearm. The skin around it was swollen, purple veins snaking out from the teeth marks, and a sickly yellow pus oozed from the edges. "It happened hours ago," he admitted, his eyes darting between them. "At a gas station, before I even got to the motel. I thought I could hide it." Ellie's stomach dropped, and she yanked the Glock from her waistband, leveling it at him in one smooth motion. Her finger hovered over the trigger, trembling just enough to show she wasn't sure. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts, fogging in the cold air. "Noah, you son of a bitch," she whispered, her voice tight with betrayal. "You've been walking with us this whole time?" Ray stepped in fast, shoving the barrel down with his free hand, his grip firm. "He's still human, damn it," he growled, his eyes locking on hers. "Look at him. He's not one of them yet." We don't do this. Noah just stood there, his head bowed, rain dripping off his hood, muttering, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, like it'd fix anything. Before they could hash it out, the store's busted doors banged open and a swarm of zombies spilled out, maybe 10, maybe more, drawn by the echo of that motel blast. Their soaked clothes slapped against their decayed bodies, heavy with water, and the sound was this awful wet thwack-thwack as they staggered forward. Ellie shoved the Glock back into her pants, grabbing her wrench instead, and Ray swung the crowbar up, ready to fight. But then something moved by the Prius. A zombie, or half of one, crawling out from under the car. Its legs were gone below the knees, just ragged stumps dragging across the asphalt, and its throat was shredded, a gaping hole where its vocal cords used to be. It moaned through the mess, a gurgling, choking sound, and rain pooled in its empty eye sockets, spilling over like tears. Ellie's skin crawled, and she muttered, "God damn, that's messed up," under her breath, stepping back as it clawed toward them. The horde closed in fast, and Ray charged forward, swinging the crowbar into the nearest one, a skinny thing in a torn flannel, cracking its jaw clean off. But in the chaos, his spare Glock magazine slipped from his jacket pocket, clattering onto the pavement with a metallic ping. "Shit!" he yelled, diving after it, right into the middle of those things. They swarmed him, clawing at his arms, nails raking through his jacket. He fired wildly, bang, 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 5, maybe 6 shots, bullets tearing through rotting flesh, dropping a couple but not enough. Blood mixed with the rain, streaking down his wrists from shallow scratches, and he roared, kicking one off his leg as he snatched the mag up. Ellie lunged in, grabbing his collar and dragging him back, her boots slipping on the wet asphalt. "You idiot! Move!" she shouted, hauling him clear as another zombie's hand swiped inches from his face. Ray stumbled to his feet, panting, his jacket hanging in tatters, those scratches bleeding steady now. "I'm fine," he snapped, shaking her off, but his hands were unsteady as he reloaded the Glock, the click of the magazine loud in the sudden lull. The horde was thinning, but more moans echoed from the store. Time was running out. That's when Noah piped up, his voice desperate. "Wait, my car!" He pointed across the lot where his beat-up Corolla sat, hood dented but still in one piece. "There's a gas can in the store. I saw it earlier. I can rig it, crash it into them, give you a shot to get out." Ellie stared at him, her jaw tight. "You're bit, Noah. You'll turn before." He cut her off, fishing his keys from his pocket, the jangle sharp against the rain. "I know. That's why it's gotta be me. Please, just trust me." Ray nodded, grim but quick. "Do it, kid. We'll cover you." Noah bolted for the store, dodging a zombie that lunged from behind a pickup and disappeared inside. Ellie and Ray held their ground, her wrench cracking a skull, his crowbar smashing another, until Noah came stumbling back out, a red plastic gas can sloshing in his hands. He sprinted to the Corolla, yanked the door open, and dumped the gas over the seats, the sharp smell cutting through the damp air. He slid in, turned the key, and the engine sputtered to life, weak, coughing, but alive. He floored it, tires squealing on the wet pavement, and peeled off toward the edge of the lot where a semi-truck sat, its fuel tanker gleaming in the dark. Zombies chased after him, drawn by the noise, their taillights fading into the storm. Ellie and Ray backed up, watching, and then, boom! The Corolla slammed into the tanker, and a fireball erupted, a deafening roar that shook the ground under their feet. Flames shot skyward, swallowing the horde in a wave of burning flesh and twisted metal, the heat so intense it seared their faces even from 50 yards away. Noah's scream cut through the blast for a split second, high and raw, then gone, lost in the chaos. Ellie threw an arm up, shielding her eyes, while Ray turned his head, the light reflecting off the blood on his wrists. Charred bodies stumbled out of the inferno, collapsing into the rain-soaked lot, and the air stank of gasoline and cooked meat. Ellie dropped her arm, her chest heaving, and glanced at Ray. "He did it," she said, her voice hoarse, almost disbelieving. Ray nodded, wiping rain and ash from his face with a shaky hand. "Yeah, kid bought us time." The moans were quieter now, scattered, but the safe zone was still half a mile off, and they were down to 2. Ellie tightened her grip on the wrench, her boots crunching on broken glass as she started forward. "Let's not waste it," she said, and Ray fell in beside her, the storm swallowing their footsteps as they pushed on. Ellie and Ray were running on empty by the time they hit the Shell station, their legs heavy like they were wading through mud, even though the ground was just wet asphalt. The rain kept pounding, a relentless drumbeat against the flickering neon sign overhead. Half the letters were out, so it just read SL in this weak, buzzing glow. The place was trashed. Shelves tipped over inside, candy bars and chip bags stomped into the floor, the cooler doors hanging open with nothing but a couple dented beer cans left behind. Ellie stumbled toward one of the pumps, her boots dragging, and collapsed against it, her back sliding down the cold metal until she hit the ground. Her breath came in sharp, ragged sobs, and she clutched the keys to her semi, still hooked on a little chain with a faded photo of her brother, like they were the only thing keeping her tethered. "Danny," she whispered, her voice breaking, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "I should have been there, should have." Ray didn't stop moving. He limped over to the counter inside, his crowbar dangling loose at his side, and scanned the mess. That's when he saw it. A note scrawled on a torn receipt, smeared with bloody fingerprints. "Gone north, good luck." He snorted, a bitter sound, and muttered, "Yeah, real helpful," crumpling it in his fist. He checked the Glock in his hand, 2 bullets left in the chamber after all the chaos, the spare mag long spent. He stepped back out, the rain soaking his torn jacket, and crouched by the pump Ellie was leaning on. He gave the handle a tug, half expecting nothing, but gas sputtered out, a thin stream splashing into a rusty jerry can someone left behind. "Hey," he called to her, his voice gruff but softer than usual. "We've got something here. Might get us a ride out of this shit show." Ellie wiped her face with a shaky hand, nodding, but before she could stand, a noise cut through the storm, a slow, dragging shuffle from the bathroom around the side of the station. Ray spun, Glock up, and out staggered this thing, one of the undead, wearing a crooked shell cap like it was still clocking in for a shift. Half its face was caved in, cheekbone smashed to pulp, and blood dripped from the mess, plinking onto the cracked tiles underfoot. It lurched forward, one arm hanging limp, the other clawing at the air, and Ray stepped back, muttering, "You've got to be kidding me." Ellie scrambled up, her wrench raised, but Ray waved her off. "Save it," he said, and fired once. Bang, the bullet punching through what was left of its forehead, dropping it face first into a puddle with a wet splat. The shot echoed too loud in the quiet after, and Ellie shot him a look. "Nice, Ray. Ring the damn dinner bell, why don't you?" He shrugged, wincing as he flexed his scratched-up arm and went back to filling the jerry can, the gas glugging steadily now. But Ellie noticed it then, his hand trembling just a little as he held the nozzle. He tugged his sleeve down quick, covering those shallow scratches from the Dollar General fight, but not before she saw how red and puffy they were getting. "Ray," she said, her voice low, stepping closer. "What's going on with your arm?" He growled, "It's nothing," yanking the can away as it hit full, but his eyes flicked to the woods across the highway. The moans were back, louder now, rolling over the rain like a tide coming in, and his jaw tightened. Before she could push it, a rumble cut through the dark, a truck engine, deep and growling, headlights slicing through the storm. It was a jacked-up Ram 1500, tires caked with mud, roaring into the lot like it owned the place. Ellie squinted, hope flaring in her chest, and waved her arms. "Hey, over here," she yelled, her voice hoarse. The truck screeched to a stop, and 3 figures piled out, 2 guys and a woman, all armed, raincoats slick and shiny. But something was off. The driver, a big guy with a hunting rifle, zeroed in on Ray, who turned to face them, his movements jerky from exhaustion, or something worse. "He's one of them!" the woman shouted, pointing, and before Ellie could blink, the second guy raised a shotgun and fired. Boom! A blast that lit up the night, ripping into Ray's chest. He crumpled, a choked gasp escaping as he fell into Ellie's arms, blood bubbling up through his lips, soaking her shirt. "Ellie, go," he rasped, his eyes wide and glassy, the Glock slipping from his hand to clatter on the wet ground. "No, no, no!" she screamed, cradling him, her hands slick with his blood as it mixed with the rain. The truck crew froze, realizing their mistake too late, but the moans from the woods were closing in fast. Dozens of shapes stumbling out from the trees, drawn by the noise. Ellie's head snapped up, rage boiling over, and she shoved Ray's body aside, grabbing the jerry can in a blind fury. She splashed gas over the pumps, the sharp smell burning her nose, and fumbled her lighter from her pocket, a scratched-up Zippo she'd carried since her trucking days. "Get back!" she yelled at the truck folks who were already piling in and flicked the lighter alive. The flame danced for a second, then she tossed it. Whoosh! The pumps went up, a roaring blaze exploding skyward, swallowing the oncoming horde in a wall of fire. The heat blasted her backward, singeing her hair, and she stumbled, tripping over Ray's Glock as the inferno lit the night. The Ram's engine roared to life, tires spinning as it peeled out, and Ellie lunged for it, throwing herself into the bed just as the full blast hit. Boom! The station erupting in a fireball that rocked the ground, flames licking at the truck's tailgate, singeing the paint black. She clung to the edge, her breath hitching, Ray's blood still warm on her hands as the truck tore off into the storm. Ellie was curled up in the bed of that Ram 1500, her knees tucked tight against her chest, the rain hammering down like it was trying to wash away everything that just happened. Her hands were still sticky with Ray's blood, even as the water streaked it off in thin, red rivers, pooling around her boots in the rusted truck bed. The wind whipped through, cold and biting, tugging at her soaked flannel, and she stared blankly at the tailgate, her face numb, shock settling in deep like a fog she couldn't shake. The Shell station's fire was just a faint orange smear in the distance now, fading fast as the truck barreled down the highway, tires humming on the wet asphalt. Up front, the driver, a grizzled guy with a scruffy beard and a hunting rifle propped against his shoulder, leaned out the window, shouting back to her over the roar of the engine. "We're heading north," he bellowed, his voice rough like he'd been yelling all night. "Heard there's a camp up there. Real people, real walls." The woman in the passenger seat, the one who'd panicked at Ray, twisted around to glance at Ellie, her raincoat hood pulled tight. "You okay back there?" She called, but Ellie didn't answer, just nodded once, barely, her jaw locked tight. She couldn't feel much of anything anymore, not the cold, not the ache in her legs, just this hollow pit where her fight used to be. The truck jostled over a pothole, bouncing her against the side, and that's when she heard it, a low, guttural moan, cutting through the wind like a knife. Her head snapped up, eyes darting to the corner of the bed, and there he was, Noah. He was slumped against the wheel well, his hoodie plastered to his skinny frame, his head lolling like he'd just passed out. But those eyes, milky white, empty as hell, locked onto her, and her breath caught in her throat. He'd been there the whole time, hidden in the shadows of the truck bed, unnoticed by the crew up front. His arm, the one with the bite, hung limp, the skin around it black and oozing now, and his lips peeled back, showing teeth stained with blood. "Noah?" She whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible over the storm. He didn't answer, just growled, a deep animal sound, and shifted, dragging himself toward her. Ellie's heart slammed against her ribs, and she scrambled back, her boots slipping on the wet metal. That's when it hit her, the final twist crashing down like a damn freight train. Noah wasn't just some kid who got bit at a gas station. He'd been bitten way before that, miles away, in some dive bar fight he'd never mentioned. She could see it now, clear as day. Him stumbling out of that bar, blood on his sleeve, kicking off this whole nightmare. He was patient zero, the spark that lit the outbreak, and he dragged them all into it, step by bloody step. She fumbled for Ray's Glock. It was still there, rattling around in the truck bed, 2 rounds left in the chamber. Her fingers closed around it, slick with rain, but she was too slow, too damn tired. Noah lunged, faster than she'd expected, his teeth bared and snapping inches from her arm. She dropped the gun with a clatter, her hands shoving at his chest, his weight pinning her down as the truck swerved, tires screeching on the asphalt. "Help!" she screamed, her voice raw, splitting the night, but the wind snatched it away, and the folks up front didn't hear a thing over the engine's roar. The Ram barreled into the fog, thick and gray, swallowing the road ahead, and Ellie thrashed under Noah, her boots kicking uselessly against the bed. His nails clawed at her jacket, tearing the fabric, and his breath, God, it stank of rot, washed over her face. She threw a punch, her fist connecting with his jaw, but it didn't faze him, not even a little. The truck hit another bump, jolting them both, and the Glock slid further out of reach, banging against the tailgate. Her scream rose again, sharp and desperate, but it was lost in the endless night, the fog closing in like a shroud as Noah's teeth grazed her skin. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.